For the next part of this session, we're focused on another deep, important topic of momentous change, and that's the field of artificial intelligence. It's having a profound impact on our world, the workplace, our lives, of course, politics. With the great opportunities of AI also come many great challenges. We have no doubt that we have the very best potential speaker on this topic. I want to introduce our moderator first, who's one of our great governors with a tremendous background in IT and computing. Our moderator will be North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Many of you know him as a presidential candidate. Well, maybe a few of you know him as a presidential candidate, but we all know him as a terrific leading governor with a strong background in IT. Before his election in 2016, Doug helped launch Great Plains Software. He launched it from a small startup company in 1983 to an award-winning tech firm. It was acquired by Microsoft in 2001. He stayed at Microsoft until 2007. He'll be moderating the conversation with software pioneer Marc Andreessen, the brilliant mind behind Netscape, a true trailblazer. Today, Marc will dive into the fascinating world of artificial intelligence. His take, AI isn't just sci-fi, it's our reality, and it's here to supercharge our lives. Actually, AI wrote that. I had my staff write one, but I went on to ChatGPT and said, how should I introduce Marc Andreessen to a group of governors? It's kind of self-serving how and how it comes back. Because its first take was it wanted me to say that Marc Andreessen believes that AI is here to save our world, but that was coming from AI, so it's a little suspect. But nevertheless, we could not have a more thoughtful leader in this area to help make sure that we as governors are up to speed with what we should know, both from the state services perspective, but also from the broader cultural, political, economic perspective. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Governor Doug Burgum and Marc Andreessen.
Well, on behalf of the National Governors Association, Marc, I wanted to say thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you, Jared, for the wonderful introduction. If people don't know, I'm Doug Burgum, based on that intro. This is Marc. But we're going to have a lively discussion today. This is going to be fun. I'm honored, of course. If you grew up in technology, this is like getting a chance to sit down with one of your superheroes, someone who truly transformed the industry and has made a difference. I mean, there's very few people that have built as many companies, created as much shareholder value, and have built products that have literally been used by billions of people. And so it's a special honor, particularly at this time when AI is touching every one of the jobs that each of these governors is doing. And so, but to kick it off, we know where the ending is, this incredible thing, but let's go back to the beginning. New Lisbon, Wisconsin, town of about 1,700 people, is where you started. And I know when you were growing up, they all said, your classmates said, that's the guy that's going to change the world. So tell us a little bit about.
So first of all, it was not that big.
At the time, it was smaller than
1,309, yes, exactly. We say the population 1,309, not including the cows. Although it's an open question as to whether they threw those in there. Rural Wisconsin, public school, agriculture, farming, community. Yeah, very small. And by the way, no Portuguese in sight. We never did. Nobody ever did find out how the town got its name.
I learned online that it was named after Lisbon, Ohio, also famous.
Oh, well, there we go.
So it was
we didn't have Wikipedia back then, so
we don't know what we
couldn't ask AI. We couldn't ask AI.
We don't know what Lisbon, Ohio was named after.
We have no idea.
Could have been named after Lisbon, North Dakota.
Exactly.
But tell me, was there a computer in your high school when you were growing up?
There was not for a while. So this was sort of right. I was in high school, sort of right on the cusp of the PC revolution. So we were kind of reading about it. You could read about it in Time magazine, but you weren't actually seeing it yet. But then we started getting computers, in high school, and we ended up with a small computer lab, and that kind of whetted the appetite. And then there were home computers in those days that were actually very, very inexpensive. They were $200, $300 home computers, and you'd hook them up to your TV set, and you'd record your programs on a cassette tape player, and maybe they would load again the next time you put the cassette in, and so that whetted my appetite.
Did you have a Radio Shack in New Lisbon?
I did. I had a Radio Shack, a great American enterprise Radio Shack. The TRS-80 was the model name, affectionately called the Trash 80. Fantastic. You can actually buy refurbished versions of those on eBay. They're fun to play with.
Retro. Did you have a teacher that inspired you early on, or were you, because I know later in your career you were teaching the teachers, but back in Lewisman, was there someone that encouraged you to get in that computer lab for the first time?
Yeah, we actually got a young teacher came in, a newly minted teacher, Mrs. Blackstone, and she came in and was a whiz and super into the stuff, and yeah, she did.
And then did you have a career counselor that said, hey, here's the college you should go to, and there's a thing called computer science, or how did that all evolve where you ended up at a state university?
No. So everybody I went to, people where I grew up, people just didn't leave the town. So it was just sort of assumed. And then if you were going to try to venture out, you would go to the University of Wisconsin system, which was very very well developed system at the time. Usually one of the smaller campuses. I grew up in northern central Wisconsin, about an hour north of Madison, and the one thing we knew was that Madison was not actually part of Wisconsin. Like Madison's where all the crazy people were, right? So you don't go there. Of course, that's the top campus. But I frankly looked at the neighboring states and looked at Minnesota. Almost went to Minnesota, and then looked at Illinois. And Illinois had a particularly strong, and still does, had a particularly strong technology engineering program. And then I was like computers, but my career planning process literally was buying the U.S. News and World Report magazine issue that went through all the college rankings, and then there was a little box at the bottom that had starting salaries by bachelor degree, because I knew it was only bachelor and I was out. There was no way I was going to stay longer because I wanted to get to work. But I looked at starting salary by bachelor degree, and electrical engineering was at the top of the list, like $40,000 average starting salary at the time or something. And I said, okay, that's it. And then I got to Illinois and I realized I did not want to deal with wires or circuit boards at all, and switched to CS, and was very happy after that.
And while you were there, then that's the work that led to Mosaic. And was that pure accident, or was there other classmates that were working with you that decided they wanted to go to a party instead of becoming a billionaire, or what was how that whole thing happened when you were working on that early project? And did you see the potential of where that could take us? And how is again the kid from New Lisbon the one that saw that potential?
Yeah. So I got very lucky. So I went to Illinois, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign at a really it turned out critical time. And I kind of knew this, but I didn't really understand the importance of it until I got there. Which is there was a federal government program at the time around what were called there was what was called the NSF-NET, National Science Foundation, basically Intranet. Basically, that was the sort of creation of the modern internet funded by NSF in the 80s and 90s. And then there was something at the National Supercomputing Program where the federal government funded 4 national supercomputing centers at 4 actually state universities. And basically, just like the government picked 4 colleges basically just like dumped money on them to build incredible computer labs, computer complexes, including these giant at the time, these Cray supercomputers that cost like $20 million a pop. This is when supercomputers, literally they were so large, this is in the early 90s, the computers were so physically large that you would build a building for the computer. And so we had one building on campus that had been built for a Cray supercomputer, and the shell of the building got built, and then the computer got lowered by crane, into the central core of the building. And then they put the roof on the building. Today, the iPhone in your pocket is about 1,000 times more powerful than that. but at the time, it was a giant building. For the Democrats who are here, Al Gore, who have gotten to know very well over the years, Al Gore kind of famously got in trouble for kind of claiming he'd invented the internet. Of course, he didn't actually say that. What he said was he had participated in the Senate in creating the internet, and that was literally true because he and a bunch of other senators, Senator Kerry and others at that time, sponsored that bill and built those centers and then built the internet backbone. And so my big stroke of luck was sort of getting dropped right in the middle of that. And it was really fascinating because we had high speed internet backbone connection way before anybody else did. We had all these supercomputers and all these incredible labs. And then then they wired the campus, and so there was broadband all over the campus, and everybody was on email, and it was like getting a glimpse of the future. The assumption was you would use these tools though when you were at school or doing research, and then when you would graduate and you would leave and you go into the real world, you would just stop using all this stuff. And so a bunch of us actually got funded to basically build software that would make this something that was easier for people to use at school and in research, but then also we also then made it available to everybody on the outside. So yeah.
And give the time frame so people understand when this period was when you were flourishing in that little bubble.
Yeah, this is 1989 to 1994. The other amazing thing about that was, so yeah, it was this amazing bubble, it was this amazing experience. The other thing that was amazing about that is, people here probably remember, between 89 and 94, there were also two other big important things happening. One is a really severe recession, and it's the recession that kind of, time forgot. People don't really think about it, but it was a very scarring experience at the time for the country. I remember very distinctly, and it actually led to, it was actually a foreshadowing in a lot of ways of more recent political developments, because it led to the rise of Ross Perot, who came out with a very populist platform, and at least some people think he maybe could have won, had things gone a little bit differently. The other thing was everybody, all of the experts, the media, like everybody believed, including I even bought into it, that basically Japan was fully ascendant at that point. And Japan had figured out, basically how to be globally dominant in technology and in the economy, and Japan was going to own everything. And I started college thinking I was going to have to learn to speak Japanese to be able to work in the tech industry. And then, as it turned out, neither of those things lasted, and so the American economic boom kind of kicked in right as I left college, and then Japan stalled out. By the way, the Japanese stock market last week just actually returned to the high that it hit in 1993. And so it was believed that it was going to take over the world, and then they literally had a 30-year sag. And they're still not out of it. They still have issues, and it's only gotten back up to its 1993 levels. But that narrative was so strong and incredibly demoralizing at the time. And we'll talk, I think, about China later on. But it's shocking to me, having lived through that 30 years ago. It's shocking to me how similar, not completely the same, but how similar the China narrative has been over the last decade. And I'm just as skeptical of the China narrative as I was about the Japanese one.
And we'll get to that towards the end, but I think demographics are destiny, and Japan has 800,000 more deaths than births every year. So in the next 20 years, they're expected as a country to shrink by 16 million people, and it's tough to grow an economy and grow workforce and all of those things when you've got that demographic tree where you've got more people that are retired out of the workforce than you have coming into the workforce.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem for obvious fiscal reasons. A small number of young people can't pay for a large number of old people. It doesn't work. It's also I think it's a problem in terms of national vitality. Something just came out of the Japanese spirit at some point, and I think that had a lot to do with it. And then look, you look at the U.S. Like we're experiencing the native-born population in the U.S. is experiencing a very similar thing. Like birth rates are in very sharp decline. Same thing, of course, happening in Europe. By the way, the same thing happening in China. China's already hit a demographic cliff, and its population is probably already shrinking. And in 30 years, China is going to be overwhelmingly senior citizens unless something changes. And so this in many ways is the most profound, I think, problem of our time that is extremely hard to come to grips with. Like in a lot of ways, it's a byproduct of prosperity, right? Economists increasingly talk about this as they call the upper income trap, which is people hit a certain level of income and they just become more interested in living interesting lives than they do having kids. Mm-hmm. But it's there are real consequences to this. And by the way, to be clear, I have an 8-year-old. I love it. I highly recommend. I highly, highly, highly recommend having kids. Just to be clear, I'm very strongly on that side of things.
And while we're on that, your 8-year-old JJ, I understand he's got a new interest from a field of study.
He does. So we're homeschooling. We're homeschooling our 8-year-old, and so he's my goal has been to have the ultimate warrior monk. Or warrior scholar, and so he does mixed martial arts 5 times a week, which I'm extremely excited about, and he loves. And then he's super into math and computers. Doug's referring to he's just started quantum physics. So his science teacher found a book. Literally, the true title is "How to Explain Quantum Physics to Your Dog." And JJ thinks this is just like the most entertaining book he's ever seen. And it actually teaches quantum physics. And so he's learning about quarks and particles and all kinds of things. So, we have high hopes. He's either going to win all the physics. He's either going to win all the physics competitions or all the MMA competitions. I'm not sure which.
Or both.
Or both.
For that monk warrior. But
or beat up all the physicists.
I think governors have got your first action item from this Q&A, which is how to teach quantum physics to your dog.
Your dog, yes.
Is a required reading going forward. Okay, so back to your school, Mosaic. You're working on a project. Tell us the leap that led to Netscape, which led to the revolution, which sort of opened up the internet for everyone.
Yeah, so the big challenge in the early 90s was this challenge of, okay, the internet actually was starting to exist. So the government was funding the backbone. By the way, business on the internet was actually illegal. So the NSF, it was public funding for the internet backbone, and so they had something called the acceptable use policy, which is a nice term for the things you can't do. And you could not do transactions. You couldn't conduct business. You couldn't do e-commerce. It was not legally allowed. You couldn't send money. And then there was just a general problem of access, which is, most people were not at the University of Illinois. Most people were not on a campus. They had access to this. And so there was actually a group that was funded as part of this to build software tools to literally make the internet more useful. And so a bunch of us kind of started this originally Renegade project called Mosaic, kind of in that group, and then it became official, and we really built it out, and that was the first web browser that a lot of people used. And then we built all the kind of tools around that to basically make the web work. And then, we reached a point. So, Mosaic started to take off in 1993. The internet started to spread. People started to figure out they could do this from home. Businesses started to connect. The government was on the verge of lifting the AUP, so you would be able to start to do business. And we passed like 1 million users of Mosaic by was it summer '93? And the thing was starting to go. And then I was the customer support rep. And so I was the guy reading the email. In between writing code, I was reading I was reading all the incoming customer support emails, and I needed to get some sleep at some point. So we applied to the National Science Foundation for a grant to build a customer support desk for the internet, and they turned us down. By the way, they very reasonably said, no, that's not the job of the National Science Foundation, is to do customer support. You guys need to figure out something else. And so I had that email, so I knew that people like using this, and then I also we released the code under a sort of an open source license that says you can use the code for anything you want, as long as it's not commercial. If it's commercial, you need to call us and get a special approval, and we were under these various rules. And we never really knew what we were going to do with it. We just knew we had to say that. And so I also had the email box of all the incoming commercial requests, and so it's literally people emailing, can I give you money? For like official licenses or to do other things. And so when that hit 400 messages of people offering money, I'm slow, but I'm not that slow. And at some point the light bulb goes off, and it's like there might actually be a business here. Mm-hmm. And so a bunch of us left and moved to California, started a company called Netscape, and basically tried to essentially kind of soak up that interest, which worked. By the way, we were greeted, a big lesson of mine, we were greeted with a wall of skepticism. And so the press coverage at the time, if you go back and you read it, it's just like, this is crazy, this is silly, there's the internet, everybody knows the internet's not useful for business, everybody knows that ordinary people are never going to use this. Like, this is just ridiculous, absurd, tech bubble, this is crazy. But, it turned out people liked it, so.
Well, and all of that probably has shaped your thinking a little bit because of the people being so wrong about so many things. And now, leaping forward, you had an incredibly successful exit. I think 4.2 billion, sold Netscape to AOL, started Andreessen Horowitz, one of the most successful VC firms. You got dozens of hot startups that are touching all aspects now of AI. You've served on the board of Hewlett Packard for 10 years, and that's a name that everybody would know. But as you know, the way the market caps are, and they look at brand names and not market caps, but at Hewlett Packard's about a $30 billion market cap. You're also on the board of Meta, the parent company of Facebook, which has a $1.2 trillion market cap, which would be close to 40 times the value of Hewlett Packard. So I mean, this is how fast everything has changed. And then of course we've got to think of that it wasn't that long ago that no one thought we'd ever have a $1 trillion market cap company, and now all the Dow and everything is being driven by Apple, Google, Microsoft, these multi-trillion-dollar companies that are happening. So you've seen so much change in your lifetime. So you've seen the personal computer, you've seen the internet, which you helped create authentically. Then we have the cell phone, which exploded. Now we have AI. So over the arc of that, you have described yourself. You've taken this amazing, wonderful, beautiful contrarian view about being optimistic about technology. You wrote a manifest last year about being a techno-optimist. That's probably been one of the most widely read thought pieces that's come out of this industry in my lifetime. And so maybe just share a little bit about the thesis and how you got there, and because again, all these events that you've been able to witness firsthand have shaped your thinking.
Yeah, so several things. So first, it's worth just spending a moment on the role of America in all this. NVIDIA, it's an American chip company headquartered in California, started about 30 years ago, venture-backed. I think one of the original VCs for NVIDIA is actually still on the board. Jensen Huang, the American, Taiwanese American, but Taiwanese American founder of NVIDIA, is still the CEO. That company, by the way, was a spin-off, sort of a spin-off from a company called Silicon Graphics, which at one point was one of these dominant companies that then later fell in hard times. You had a very long road, had a 20-year journey of, I would say, real struggle. They did well, but it was sort of continuous kind of fight to stay in business and to grow. And then, they really just, caught in the last 10 years, their technology roadmap just turned out to be incredibly prescient. And then they caught the 3D graphics wave, they caught the blockchain wave, and now they caught the AI wave as a result of all their hard work. That company just passed a $2 trillion market cap on the US stock market. That company now has a larger market cap than the entire public stock market of Germany. Right, so one American company is bigger than the entire German industry. Right, that's just one, right? And we have several of those now. We have Apple. I think Apple. I forget the exact comparison, but these individual companies. It's like one's bigger than the market cap of Germany, another's bigger than the market cap of France, another's bigger than the market cap of Japan. It is really remarkable what happens. Kind of when these companies run. And look, America is just like putting these things. There's basically only two countries building companies to this level of scale and sophistication now. It's basically us and China. Europe used to. If you looked at a ranked market cap list of tech companies globally 30 years ago, Europe was a pretty high percentage of them. I think on the top 50 now, it's down to one. So Europe has decided that they just don't want this. European bureaucrats. There's a big FT story a couple years ago where they said, we basically have concluded that we no longer can be the world leader in creating technology, and so instead we've decided to become the world leader in regulating technology.
And those two are related, actually.
Well, so it's just like, yeah, if you don't want tech, just do what the EU has done, and they continue to double down on this, and it's crazy. And if you talk to, we talked to national leaders from other countries, and I was just with a very senior Swedish business person the other day, and it's just like, yeah, Sweden has a very dynamic and fertile entrepreneurship technology environment, and then it's part of the EU. It's just up against this wall of repression from the EU. Just absolutely does not want this stuff to happen, and then as a consequence, of course, European economic growth is much lower, and they have all kinds of internal problems as a result. I mean, for example, it's hard to pay for a modern military if you don't have a growing economy and the tax base that flows from that, and so they're in their own vice on that. But anyway, the point is just like the American success stories here are just like absolutely spectacular, and of course that's a huge credit to the people who built those companies, but it's also a huge credit to the system, that we all have that this is possible. Techno-optimism, I identify as a techno-optimist. I would say 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that would have been a non-controversial statement. Everybody would have said, wow, of course, tech is, fantastic and wonderful, and it's economic growth, and it's, fantastic. And it's become, I would say, very, fashionable in the last decade in particular to go very dark and negative. And by the way, my experience is the two political sides, kind of have different. They both have negative views on tech. They're negative for different reasons, but they're both negative. And of course, I would say, look, like the fact is that tech has become central. Tech has become so central and important to how society functions. That of course it's going to end up embroiled in politics. It's going to end up, people are going to really be looking at it for the impact it's having on society. There's a real responsibility on the part of the tech industry to explain what we're doing and why it's good. And I think we've frankly largely failed to do that over the last couple of decades. And so, a lot of this is our fault. But the narrative has become very negative. I think it is worth, though, at least considering the positive side, which is what I try to lay out in my essay. And the core positive thing on technology is technology is the lever on the world that lets us escape from a world of poverty and manual labor and misery and death, and actually get to a quality of life that we aspire to for ourselves and our family and our descendants. The sort of modern American lifestyle is the beneficiary of 200 years of industrialization. Much of the rest of the world is actually still going through that process, and so it's every day. I don't know what the number is now. Something like 5 million people a day are sort of connected to the electric power grid globally. Still, like at that rate. It's everything. It's access to clean water. It's access to energy. It's access to the internet. It's access to media. It's access to job opportunities. It's access to education. Technology is the lever that we use to make the world better. From an economic standpoint, tech is the central driver of economic growth, and tech is the central driver of economic growth because tech is the driver of productivity growth. And right, the most fundamental way the economy works is you can either year after year be putting in the same inputs and putting out the same outputs, in which case you just don't grow, right? Because you just have hard constraints and you don't grow, or you can apply technology and each year you can put out more output for less input. And economists, call that productivity growth. And we live at a time where everybody believes tech disruption is very high, but if you look at the economic statistics, actually productivity growth is at historic lows. The economy is actually not changing very fast. In fact, the economy since the introduction of the computer has changed less quickly. Productivity growth has been lower than the economy in the 3 decades before the computer, right? Which is just like completely bizarre reverse phenomenon from kind of what you would think. And so the sort of downward spiral that you can get into is if you have low productivity growth, you have low economic growth. If you have low economic growth, you have no opportunity, right? You don't have job creation, you don't have business creation. If you don't have that, you don't have any sense of the future, right? And then you're a parent, you've got kids, or you're a young person coming up, and you're like, well, what am I going to do that's going to make my life better and have a higher standard of living than my parents? And like, it doesn't exist because there's no growth. You don't have it. And then, of course, if you're in a system that has no growth, you're in a system that's going to devolve to zero-sum politics, right? Because then it's going to be dog eat dog. For me to get something, I have to take it away from somebody else. My personal view is the rise of populism on both the left and the right is a consequence of we're just not growing. We're just not growing the way that we should be growing. Our society is just too stagnant. Our economy is just too stagnant. And the only way to grow faster is to apply more technology. It's the only way to get more output with less input. And so the good news is we have these amazing new technologies. We have the internet, we have AI, we have blockchain, we have biotech, we have CRISPR. We have like all of these incredible new technologies that we can use. Basically, the global technology battle is basically down to us and China. There's no reason on earth that we shouldn't be able to win that. There's no reason on earth that our economy shouldn't grow enormously over the next 30 years. But we have to decide whether we want that to happen. And I think right now we're in this sort of psychological state where I think it's an open question.
I'm just going to interject on something just a minute ago without making may come across a political statement, but this is an economic statement because you very accurately said that growth comes from increases in productivity.
Yeah.
There's another where you can fool yourself into thinking you have growth, which is if you print money or borrow money from your adversaries and then just inject that into the economy, you can have a growth in jobs and things, but you're not getting a growth in productivity. So we just have to be careful that right now you might say, hey, we got all this, fiscal spending and budgetary spending that could be tricking people into that we've really solved our economic problems. But I think you're focusing on the underlying productivity gain.
And can I just add one thing to that? Yeah, one of the things I identified in my manifesto is actually like whether people are on the left or the right, they should want economic growth. If you're on the right, you should want it because free market and opportunity and all the things that people on the right value. If you're on the left, economic growth is what generates the tax base to be able to pay for all the programs, right? And so if you want to increase social spending, the way to get it is to have a faster growing economy and then therefore more tax revenue. And so to me, this of all things really ought to be a bipartisan issue. By the way, there have been many times in the past that this has been a bipartisan issue. In the 90s, this was a bipartisan issue, and kind of everybody knew this was the right path. And it's just sitting right, it's just basically sitting there waiting for us to pick it up.
And let's take this and bridge to AI, because if you think about these big gains in productivity, you talk about America and our 200-year growth path that's taken us to the largest economy in the world and now producing these at-scale global companies. But some of this began with the industrial revolution, the agricultural revolution. I mean, I look at what we've done. I mean, in agriculture, we're producing with the same inputs versus outputs have grown like 100-fold in the last century. In terms of labor, the percentage of people that work in agriculture in this country is gone from 20% down to like 1%. I mean, so there's just huge gains that have happened. Are we at the cusp of another major revolution driven specifically by AI, which is, because in your and I's lifetime, every job, every company, and every industry has been transformed by technology. Now we have something that's more powerful. It's being adopted at a faster rate than cell phones, the internet, or personal computers. Is the AI revolution going to open up a window for productivity, or are we going to regulate ourselves in such a way that we keep having this slower growth than we should be achieving?
Yeah, so we really ought to have a huge economic boom and growth boom coming out of AI, and I'll hopefully spend a fair amount of time talking about that. It really ought to happen. Like it really does. Put it this way, everybody in my world really thinks we're on the cusp of this, and thinks that the next few decades could just be really extraordinary. I think the backdrop I'd provide to it is actually what you described of like the shifting, the shifting fates of companies, in our world. And again, this has been a historic strength of the American system, right? At least in the tech industry historically, if you have a tech company and it actually is on the leading edge and doing things that are valuable and important and new and staying current and embracing these new trends, it tends to do very well and it tends to grow very fast and become very valuable, create lots of jobs. If it falls behind, down it goes, right? And of course, that leads to dramatic headlines of once great companies that are now falling on bad times or layoffs and bankruptcies, and those are obviously bad in the moment. But in aggregate, our system, one of the reasons our system works so well and generates these incredible companies is because both labor and capital actually do reallocate to the new opportunities. They don't just get stuck in companies of the past that have basically government-blessed monopolies and it just sort of stagnate forever. Actually both the people and the money actually migrates to the new companies. And so we do have this like marvelous system where our sort of the creative destruction of entrepreneurship and capitalism really does work the best in the U.S. Certainly out of every Western country. And then that's where we can really harvest the benefits of technology because the fact is like some incumbent companies are just not going to be able to keep up with this, but we're going to have other world-beating companies that form and do this. AI itself, I think the reason to be very optimistic about the downstream consequences is basically that it's a way to think about it is in one way it's the latest of a series of waves of new technology that we've seen play out. And so you mentioned mainframe, PC, web, mobile, cloud, SaaS. We've had all these waves of technology over the last 30 years that have powered a lot of the American economy and the tech industry. AI is another one of those, and so it's being embraced by Silicon Valley as probably the 6th or 7th or 8th kind of big platform in the last few decades. And so we're all going to try to transform the industry based on that. But beyond that, it represents potentially a real broadening out of sort of think about usefulness of the computer, right? And so everybody's kind of had this experience, which is everybody now has computers, and the one thing you know about computers is like they're super like they're really not good at dealing with people. Traditional computers, right? And so the classic thing is you tell a computer what to do, it doesn't do what you want. It's always your fault, right? Because you somehow told it the wrong thing, like you didn't press the right sequence of buttons, or you didn't enter the computer code in the right way. And so, computers up until now have been these sort of very hyper-literal kind of calculating machines, very rigid in what they can do. And so the good news is like they can do math, at very high speeds, but you certainly can't talk to them, right? And look, great companies tried to solve this problem, with things like Alexa and Siri, over the last decade, and I don't know how many people use Alexa and Siri, but like you can talk to it a little bit, but like not that much, and it gets confused very easily. What we just got to work in the last few years is basically a kind of computer, AI, that basically is able to deal with human beings in a way that human beings are much more comfortable with. And so you see this when you use these products, but I can talk to it in English, it responds to me in English. By the way, I can talk to it in any other language, it'll happily respond in that language. One of the fun things about these text-based AI systems like ChatGPT is they're trained on English, but they just kind of by default know all the other languages. Because it just turns out that they just like are trained on the internet, and there's lots of content on every language on the internet. They're really good at understanding English. They're also now getting very good at voices. So the voice synthesis, voice recognition is getting really good. So computers in the future, you'll just physically talk to. My 8-year-old actually has a prototype toy from a startup in the Valley called Grok, and it's a little stuffed animal with a little voice box and a little Wi-Fi radio in it, and it basically lets him talk. It lets him talk verbally to basically to ChatGPT on the back end. And the musician Grimes voices the thing, and so it sounds like a cute little teddy bear. And as the parent, you can go in and it's called define the prompt, and so you can sort of define, as the parent in the app, you can kind of decide how it's going to act. You can kind of give it a personality or tell it it's allowed to talk about certain things or not other things. And so I literally activated it so I could talk to him about quantum physics, and so now he's got this cute little teddy bear that knows all about quarks and neutrinos. And to him, it's just like, oh, well, this is just obvious, right? He's 8. Well, so about a year ago when ChatGPT started to work, I set it up on his little laptop, and I was so proud of myself as a parent because I'm Prometheus bringing fire down, for my child. This is like I'm introducing him to AI, and he's going to be able to have this tutor and mentor that's going to be with him his entire life and answer every question, and this is going to be so great for his education development. And I rolled it out to him, and I said, JJ, you just type in a question here, and it'll answer the question, and he looked at me, and he was like, yeah. And I was like, no, this is like amazing. This is like the biggest breakthrough we've ever had. And this is just like amazing. Well, he's like, well, what else is a computer for if you can't like ask it questions and have it answer the questions? He's like, duh, right? So that one got me a complete, eye roll. I did impress him. I told him I know Mr. Beast, which I actually do, who's the big YouTube star, and so that impressed him. But the ChatGPT, not at all. And so anyway, it's just computers are just going to get really, really good at dealing with people. By the way, you see the same thing with the revolution of self-driving cars, right, which continues to move along. Where they're just like computers are getting really good at driving cars, which means computers are getting very good at understanding the natural environment. They're getting very good at understanding how to like stay out of accidents. They're getting very good at learning how to sort of function among people. And so we basically have the chance to make computers much more naturalistic and just have them like fit much more naturally into our lives. And so therefore the number of ways that they can be used is going to expand dramatically. By the way, robotics is next up, right? So there's been the long-awaited dream. You watch science fiction shows or whatever, and there's humanoid robots going around, packing your suitcase and making you coffee and doing all these things. And we've never had that. We've never even been remotely close to having that working. I think there's really good prospects in the next decade that we'll actually start to get that to work on top of this. And so the opportunities here from a quality of life standpoint, I think are really great. And then look, these industries ought to just be gigantic. I mean, the level of job creation and economic growth that comes out of these technologies ought to be just absolutely cosmic if that's what we decide we want.
Well, let's talk about the role of governors for a minute, and maybe tick through these quickly. But I think when we think about as governors, and the way we're thinking about this in North Dakota, there's sort of four things to think about with AI. The first one is all of you are operating leaders that run state government, and you've always been trying to apply technology to make it, better, faster, more efficient, more responsive to the citizens. So that's number one, which is just a pure automation play, where you could maybe take 20% of the work that's happening in state government and just automate it. It goes away. You don't need people to do that. At our offsite we had after we got done with the legislative session last spring, we had a 2-day offsite on AI. And of course, we had our agency leaders, all the governors know this, they came in, oh, we didn't get all the FTEs that we wanted from the legislature. Oh, we didn't get all the budget we wanted. I said, great, well, here's the deal. Each of you have got now an assistant, which we found available that will sit alongside of each one of your current team members. It speaks 26 languages and it can code. It's free, it doesn't need a cube, it works 24 hours a day, never goes on vacation. And we just need to teach you how to be able to use that assistant to be able to do that work. We've run a thing where we've done a pilot program. We had people apply to like an academy. They split into teams across silos of government. They worked through different scenarios. We picked 8 pilots that were driving. But we're driving through and all this stuff, taking the ideas from these leaders about how we can, from our extended leadership team of about 160 leaders, how can we start driving that automation play? But that's sort of table stakes, get starting on that. I think the next part of that automation is augmentation, which is how do we take an existing job that's not going to go away, but how do you make it more purposeful, more interesting by using AI? So you make the work, because all of us are competing for talent, and we have to have meaningful, purposeful jobs that people want to do, not just rote things. The second thing that I know some governors are working with, people have been rolling out code of ethics and regulations. We do have a regulatory role that we have to think about, so that's going to be a piece there. But then there's something that's even bigger, which is all of us fund education and healthcare. Those are the biggest parts of any of your budgets. And these are every industry is going to get blown up by AI. Healthcare is going to get completely blown up by AI. The whole legal system is going to get blown up by AI. And education is, because now as your 8-year-old yawned in discovery, but now we have devices where, anytime, any place, anywhere, you can ask it and get, you can get the information back from that. And we know that's been coming, but now that's here. So how is it going to affect the private sector industries that we all fund? And then the last thing is which we touched on a little bit, is global competitiveness. Each of us are always competing with each other for jobs and talent and capital to come to our states, but part of that competition is going to shift to who's going to be able to have the framework, the education system that is producing the workforce, the human capital that actually understands this. So those are like kind of 4 things that we've thought about that we think we need to think about as governors. But what advice would you have for these governors as they step into the whole world of AI, as specifically as a governor, touching these, all the aspects that they have to do.
Yeah, so maybe we could touch these one at a time. So the workforce service, so the like customer service, like there's a lot of, so it turns out, it's very, very funny. It turns out everybody, all the science fiction authors thought robots would figure out how to do manual labor first, right? And so you'd have robots, like as I said, cleaning your toilet, folding your clothes, making your coffee. It turns out those are actually really hard problems, and we actually still don't have that. But we now have robots that are really good at answering emails, right? And we also have robots that are really good at writing emails. And of course, anybody who's in a job in any sort of white collar setting has the experience of looking at the email box and just having this incredibly depressing feeling of having to like process through all this. And so we now have the opportunity to have a completely different kind of tool. And we have a lot of companies that are working on this right now, but a completely different kind of tool at basically being able to process through white collar work. And as you said there, I mean, really, the dream on this ought to be that the jobs, the computer is the assistant on these things. I actually think the term AI, you refer to artificial intelligence. I think you equally could think of it as augmented intelligence, which basically is the sort of turbo boost for especially the human white collar worker. And so, yeah, the ability to either augment the worker, give the worker a lot more leverage, be able to process through a lot more, whatever it is, everything from insurance claims to applications to complaints, whatever. The private sector is going to hit this really hard, and that's already started. And so there's for sure a big opportunity there. Which one should we do? What should we do next?
Let's skip regulatory, leave that at the end, but just talk about the healthcare and education. Where do you see that disruption happening there?
Yeah, so I want to spend a second on education. So a thumbnail sketch, which is basically every student from here on out ought to have an AI tutor, teacher, helper that just is with them and just like knows them and is able to answer questions and is able to kind of meet them at their level for any topic that they're studying, whether it's math or English or anything else. And then, by the way, similarly, every person ought to have an AI doctor who's on call 24/7, they're endlessly patient, endlessly tolerant, and knows everything about your medical history and is able to help you with everything there, including coaching you on like lifestyle issues and so forth. And then quite the lawyer, every person really ought to have an AI lawyer on tap, and that's either for everything that they struggle with and how they deal with the government or how they deal with big companies, right? And to put people on toe to toe. So when you're on the phone with, I don't know, whatever, United or something, trying to get a refund, you've got an AI lawyer like right there with you, like helping you do it. And so, those are the kinds of, major, I think, quality of life things that are coming. Spend a moment on education, because this is actually a very kind of profound kind of thing inside education. So there's been education reform movements, forever, and especially the last 40 or 50 years, a lot of us have been, very dissatisfied with the results out of the education system at various levels, and there have been lots of philanthropists and politicians and reformers of different kinds, and, by the way, teachers and administrators who have tried to improve educational outcomes. And and basically, if you look at the entire history of that over the last 40 or 50 years, the net result of it basically is nothing works. Nothing works, and so you just kind of pour in more money, and results don't improve. You whatever. They don't improve. One of the big foundations that works in education did a big retrospective study recently where they went through 40 years of education reform efforts, and basically nothing changed. And so there's sort of a general level of sort of depression, kind of in that world. So it turns out there is one known way to systematically improve education outcomes, and it's something very well studied in the education research literature. It's called the Bloom effect, after this guy Bloom who figured it out. It's also sometimes called the 2 sigma effect, which I'll describe. And it is a repeatable way. It's called the 2 sigma effect because it is a repeatable way to take students who are at the 50th percentile in the distribution of outcomes and move them to the 99th percentile, which is to move them 2 standard deviations. And it's a way that works repeatedly, and it kind of works every time you apply it. And it's just you can kind of turn the crank and do it as often as you want, and you get much better outcomes. It turns out, what is it? It's one-to-one tutoring. If you have a student and a teacher and they're working one-to-one and they're in a synergistic feedback loop where the teacher has a full awareness of where that student is, what they call the zone of proximal development, where like the student, the tutor knows exactly where the student needs to be dialed in. So each new question or topic is just, it's just hard enough to require a challenge, but not so hard that the student can't do it, right? And then if the student is like really bright, you can move at a much faster pace. If the student is struggling in an area, you can take more time on that area. And then it's one-to-one tutoring, and so therefore, right, you don't have the challenge that a teacher with a classroom of 30 has, where you're trying to deal with the distribution of students. You just have one student you're optimizing. And in fact, if you go back in history, basically aristocratic education and royal education was always based on tutoring, right? So then the famous case is Alexander the Great was tutored by Aristotle. Now, we're not all going to have Aristotle as a tutor, but like it worked, and he took over the world. So like you have these like amazing, kind of historical success cases. And then, of course, the quite obvious question is like, okay, if this works so well, why don't we do it? And of course, the reason is because it's impossibly not affordable, right? There's no way you could go from a teacher-student ratio of 1 to 30 to 1 to 1, and you blow up the economy, unless you can use technology, right? Unless you can use AI. And so we actually have the technology for the first time to give every student this kind of tutor. And I think, by the way, the answer is some sort of blended thing where you have teachers and you have certain classroom and group activities for sure, but you also have this thing where a student and an AI tutor should be in a full relationship. And by the way, the AI tutor is not just working with the student; it's also working with the parents. It's also working with the teachers, to be able to help optimize the outcomes for the students. And so like we know that would work. We know that wealthy families are going to do this. There are companies doing this. This is becoming something people in Silicon Valley are very focused on. And so there is the potential to reinvent the education system in a way that will move outcomes dramatically. And so that's the kind of opportunity that we're sitting on. Again, there's a choice question here as to whether we want that. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody's going to say they want that in theory, but do we want that in practice? But that is what's sitting in front of us.
I'm going to we'll go to questions from the governors, and we'll close out at the end on sort of regulation versus in national security and how those are related. But I would say on healthcare, one thing that we do know that you're going to get with AI is a massive acceleration of rapid prototyping for drug development. And so I think one of the things that governors should be thinking about, if you've still got state pension funds, you've got to get ready for a really expanded lifespan. I mean, one of the things that we accomplished in North Dakota this year was closing our defined benefit healthcare plan, in part because we helped the legislatures understand it's going to be unaffordable when the kid that you hire today at 25 to go into state government is going to live to be 100, because entire disease classes that we deal with today that we spend trillions of dollars on will be gone by the time they're 70 or 80. Those will be fixed. And so then you're going to end up with a serious demographic issue just with longer lifespans, and states will all be going bankrupt on their pension funds if they don't figure out, how to get into defined contribution instead of defined benefit. And that's one of the things with AI will drive rapid successes on the healthcare side.
Can I just hit healthcare, just medical experience? So the thing about AI doctors, so today, I'm sure everybody has this experience. You go to the doctor and you have like a 15-minute window, and they spend the entire time asking you questions that are in your file, right? Because they didn't have time to read it before the appointment. And then the appointment's over, right? And then you wait a year and you go back and you repeat the process. Rich people have concierge medicine, right? So you've got a doctor who actually knows you, who's available on call, who talks to you, who actually keeps up. But like the normal experience is like not even remotely that, number one. Number two is existing healthcare is like 100% reactive, right? By the time you show up in the doctor's office and you have diabetes and this and that, right? It's the result of 10 or 20 years of sort of compounding problems. And your doctor is trying to fix the thing that's wrong with you as opposed to try to optimize your health. And of course, more and more of both our medical issues and our medical spending are geared towards downstream health effects of behavioral crises, right? Around things like obesity and depression and nutrition and smoking and alcohol and so forth. And so again, you want to kind of close your eyes and imagine everybody having an AI doctor that's with you 24/7, that knows everything about you, that is more than happy to talk to you at length about whatever's worrying you, is able to help coach you on all the lifestyle issues that are going to lead to better health outcomes in the future, and then is able to intervene, very early, when there's an actual problem. And again, working in concert with human doctors and working in concert, with professionals in hospitals. But again, there's this like dramatic step function upgrade, basically to give everybody the equivalent of what rich people have today with concierge medicine. And it's just right there. Like we know that we can do this if we want it.
Yep. We've got some folks have indicated interested in questions before, so we'll go to Governor Glenn Youngkin for our first question.
Yeah, good morning. I guess good afternoon. Thank you, and Mark, thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us. Virginia, as we were talking about earlier today, has an extraordinarily rapid growth in technology, underpinned by our market-leading position in the data center industry and cybersecurity. And so we as a state were watching Washington go very slow on artificial intelligence, and last year undertook an effort very much, Governor, like yours, and spent many months digging in deep, extensive research, and came out with a very similar set of objectives. Objectives really targeted how can we provide better service and embrace AI, how can we incorporate artificial intelligence and advanced machine learning into our law enforcement capabilities, how can we embrace innovation and experimentation in education. We also added a whole side of citizen protection, and particularly around data protection, where decisions need to stop and where a human being needs to step in. How do we protect our children from advanced algorithms of predatory use of AI? And I was hoping you could comment a bit on that side, where there is clearly this unlimited opportunity that this technology presents, but also there are concerns and risks. And how do we balance that to make sure that we're not losing the arms race, but also protecting the people that we're charged to protect?
Yeah, so to start with, to be super clear, right? Every new technology has its upside and downside. And by the way, this goes all the way back to like literally the invention of fire, the harnessing of fire, right? Fire can be used to warm the village and to cook the food and to scare off predators, and fire can be used to burn down, the other village and kill everybody. So, and then this is true of like, the shovel, you can hit somebody over the head, the automobile, you can run them over, you just walk right through the history of technology. Nuclear, the movie Oppenheimer kind of did a great job illustrating this. You can build the atomic bomb, or you can build, zero emission, nuclear power plants, like France has, and like California used to have. You can, have sort of unlimited zero emission energy. And so there's this double-sided, aspect to all these things. It's the nature of doing things. It's the nature of doing things in the world. There's really two so of course there's going to be regulatory implications to all of this because of the downsides, and they need to be mitigated. Fundamentally, there are two different regulatory approaches on how to deal with these technologies. One is to regulate the technologies themselves, right? And the proposals now on regulating AI, a lot of that has to do with things like regulating what actually can go into chips, right? Regulating who gets to buy chips, how they get used, regulating software, regulating open source software, deciding who can actually download open source software, who can use it, who can write it. And so that's one approach. And then the other approach is regulating the uses, right? Or regulating the bad uses, right? And so that approach says, okay, if AI is going to make it, easier for somebody to plan a bank robbery, then it turns out bank robberies are already illegal, right? And so we're going to use the, the authorities, on that front to be able to offset that risk. Or, invasion of consumer privacy is already illegal, or, medical, whatever you want. Medical fraud is illegal. Whatever are the downside cases, those things are already illegal. The good news is in this country we have a robust system of laws and regulations already today. I think for basically most or all of the downside scenarios that I hear people talk about, either at the law enforcement level for domestic issues, or intelligence capabilities for dealing with things at the global level. I think it's far more both effective to regulate the uses because you're actually addressing the actual issues, and it also preserves the underlying, fundamental opportunity in all the positive cases of not fundamentally choking off the technology itself. But that is a decision we're going to have to make. I'll also, we'll maybe touch on China, but I'll also say I would say I have pretty schizophrenic discussions in DC on this topic, because I have a fair number of conversations with people who are like, okay, like this technology is like new and scary, and we have to regulate it. We have to stop it. We have to regulate it. We have to, figure out some way to tightly control it or constrain it. We have to really slow everything down, if not stall it completely. Kind of on Tuesday, and then I come back on Thursday, and they say, well, China's building it, so we have to win. And we have to race as fast as possible, and we have to really build this out, and we have to make sure American, companies are as aggressive as possible, and the government adopts this stuff as aggressively as possible because we have to beat China. And I think it kind of gets to this. It's this sort of downstream issue, Governor, for what you identified, which is, at the end of the day, we are going to have to decide: are we in as a country, are we in new technologies to win them? And do we want to live in the world in which we are so used to America being technologically dominant, which also means economically dominant, which also means militarily dominant. I mean, we're so used to that. It's been the case for 80 years. And we do face actual global threats and challenges, and I think we have to figure out how to win, right, and how to have American enterprise win and the American people win in this, while also being able to deal with the downside cases.
We'll go next to Governor Greg Gianforte, someone else who has spent his career in software before he became a governor. Greg?
Thank you for this conversation. So We've been experimenting with AI in Montana. We put a bunch of our regulations into ChatGPT for Business and told it to rewrite it at a high school graduation level, because that's not the level they're written at right now, and it's still in process. But I want to follow up on two things. Particularly excited about this AI doctor and AI tutor in education. And my question is, how far are we in time frame away from deployment at scale in those two areas?
Yeah, so I think there's a two-part kind of thing there. One is the technology reliable? And so we're not quite there yet on reliability. And you may have read stories about this where this the way these systems work is if they're configured in certain ways, they're like super genius, and if they know the answer to something, they'll tell you the answer. But then there's this problem with what they call hallucinations, or if they don't know the answer, they'll make it up. And in fact, there are lawyers that have actually gotten in trouble because they've filed actually legal briefs with courts that were written by ChatGPT, and they had the settings turned so that it would hallucinate, and they filed briefs that have citations to cases that actually don't exist. It turns out judges do not find this to be entertaining. So the consequences are quite severe. But there's like a whole generation of startups that is now figuring out how to basically harness these systems to make sure that that never happens. The same thing is happening in the medical field. The same thing is happening for education. So there's some work that we're still doing as an industry. So we're, I would say a couple years out from the kind of reliability we need. So we're working on that. The other side of it is, so again, it's back to the question of do we want this, which is, lawyers are licensed by the state, right, by the bar associations, by the government, and, can there be such a thing as an AI lawyer? Legally, certainly not today. Doctors are licensed, and even if the machine can pass, medical school, all the curricula and the tests and everything.
Which it has,
Which it has, basically the current so the truth is like GPT-4, the ChatGPT-4 and its equivalents today are they in like 90, I don't even know, 90 some percent. And this is just me. I'm not making like an absolute claim here for everybody, but just like if I were going to think about it this way as an individual, like it's a better doctor 97% of the time than any human doctor you're going to talk to, just because it knows everything, right, that's ever been written about every medical topic. It stays current by definition on everything. And it's able to analyze huge amounts of data. And if you feed it your medical records, it will tell you, it's almost certainly going to give you better diagnoses today than most human doctors. And so from that standpoint, this is very close. And so we close the gap. We build these systems so they're really reliable. But then you have this question of like, okay, can an AI be a doctor, right? And the answer once again is like legally no. It's like completely not allowed. And so, okay, so then there will need to be some man-machine partnership where it'll work in conjunction with a human doctor, with a healthcare system, with a hospital chain, with the government, with Medicare. Like, how does that work? And so there are big open questions there.
Things to figure out.
And the same thing in education. Like, it's easy for me to sit up here and say we're going to reform the education system for one-to-one tutoring from AI, but like, my understanding is the education system is heavily influenced by large organizations that have large vested interests in it. And so, there are really big there are really big fundamental societal questions in front of us.
We're gonna jump over. We'll go from Montana to Wyoming. Governor Mark Gordon has a question.
Well, thank you, and really appreciate the conversation. This past summer, I was at a CNBC summit where they were talking about AI pretty remarkably, and what I found amazing, at some point, one of the commentators said, well, is it really important we have libraries anymore because we're going to have access to all information everywhere? On its face, it was really kind of an interesting concept, but what really concerned me is what's happened with our wayfinding skills with GPS and other things. So I guess the question is, how do we find a critical way of evaluating, if you're doing a tutor, what that education is looking like and how it proceeds?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was having trouble hearing the echo. Can you?
I just was saying, how would you evaluate the tutor going forward? I mean,
yeah.
You want to maybe say it again, Mark, at the very end?
Yeah, just the critical aspect of, if it's an AI tutor, you turn it over to your child, and then that wherever that goes, it goes.
So I just, I mentioned that Grok toy that I have for the kid that he talks to. So I go in the app on my phone and it has all the questions and answers. It's just all I know. I can go to access it sitting here right now and I can tell you exactly what he's asking and exactly what it's saying. And I can see that, and I watch every step of that. And I think the exact same thing can apply where both parents and human teachers and administrators and auditors, whatever you want, human beings can be eyes on this. By the way, I think for a lot of parents, that would be a very big difference than what they have today, where they have no idea what's happening in the classroom. And if what's happening in the classroom is good, then then that's great. But if it's not, today they have no way of seeing it. I tell you, I think a lot of parents were actually fairly surprised by what they saw when their kids went to Zoom school 4 years ago. And it's like school attendance rates have never recovered, right, from pre-COVID. And I think part of that is I think some number of parents at least were pretty shocked and alarmed by what they saw. But the fact that it was on video for the first time was the first time they actually got to see inside the classroom. And so anyway, the point being is I think what the question you asked is very important. I think the answer is this technology ought to make things actually a lot more transparent. And actually, by the way, give parents a much bigger role.
Doug and
As
Mark,
we close
we're
out
out
here.
of time, so
Yeah.
I apologize. And I get the chair's prerogative. I get to ask the last question.
Okay, you get the last question, then I'm going to close, but
Great.
fire away.
Mark, it's great to see you again. Thank you for being here with us. Can you just touch on, and I know you kind of have, but there's been an interesting thing happening this week with a new AI, Google's AI. A lot of controversy over kind of what we're putting in. I think this goes a little bit to Mark's question as well, and then Doug will let you wrap up, please.
Yeah, so this is the thing with the Google Image Generator, which has been very, very controversial, and it's actually really entertaining what's happened because so people discovered it simply flat out refuses to make pictures of white people, and so people on one side of the political spectrum got very upset about this, and then the New York Times wanted to cover it, but of course they could not write that story, and so what they figured out is it also makes all Nazis black. And so if you ask it to render like stormtroopers in like Germany in like 1941, they're all like of color, which by the way, I'm told that was not actually the case. I'm told actually Hitler actually was not pro-diversity. And so maybe it's important to like accurately reflect that if people are studying World War II. And so they literally, the headline of the New York Times was that headline, which is Google's making up black Nazis. And so it's like, okay, what's going on? And so basically what's going on there is that there's been this dramatic shift in how new technology gets built. 30 years ago when I started and when you were doing your work, we built products like the word processor or the web browser, and the word processor never argued with you about what you were typing. It just let you type whatever you want. Or by the way, phone calls, the AT&T was never on the line with you, arguing with you or trying to convince you that you were wrong about some topic. The way these AI systems are getting built, for better or for worse, is with this concept they call alignment, which is short for they call it alignment with human values. And so what these AI companies have is they have teams that basically are attempting to train the AI to conform with some viewpoint. And by the way, you probably want that, right, to some extent, right? Because you don't want the AI, you don't want like a lot of people are not going to want a completely uncontrolled AI in their lives or in their kids' lives that says all kinds of crazy stuff or indulges every single possible conversation that you could have. You can imagine all kinds of ways that would go wrong. So for a lot of systems that a lot of people are going to use, you probably want some level of guardrails. But every company that's in the AI business now has to decide, okay, what are the human values that it's going to align against? And then AI is going to be the way that we deal with computers in the future, which means it's going to be the way we deal with a lot of things in our lives in the future. And so how these systems work and what biases they have, or what things that they think they're allowed to talk about, or what things they have to talk you out of, or convince you of. Like these are going to be very, very important questions. The team at Google who's doing this, I mean, I know they have the best of intent. They trained it in a very specific way. They are now, inside that company, they're now recalibrating and trying to figure out how to adjust that. This will be a big issue in the industry. This also cuts directly into your roles and into the role of the federal government, which is these companies are under tremendous pressure to have the technology work in certain ways, and there's a lot of frankly political lobbying that's taking place on that front at these companies. And so this will remain a live issue. I actually think it's good that this happened because this really surfaced what I think is going to actually be a very important issue.
Thank you, Spencer, for that question. To wrap it up here, I want to do two things. One is give a quick shout out to small towns. Greg Brockman from Thompson, North Dakota, population about 300, one of the co-founders of OpenAI. Went to Rough Rider High School in Grand Forks, North Dakota. They did have computers in high school. So that's fun to see. I want to thank all of the questions. I want to thank the governors. I want to thank NGA for lining this up. I want to thank Mark for not only shaping an industry and shaping the world, but spending your time here with us. Appropriately, I'll close. I did just minutes before we walked up here, I asked ChatGPT or Bing Copilot to write a poem for you, because it not only writes transfers emails, it can And I know that Bill Lee's working on this because they're trying to protect it in Nashville, which is a huge. Now they have more musicians and more people in the music industry in Tennessee than any other state, so they're working on legislation to protect songwriters and the intellectual property, because this stuff can write songs, it can write poems. But to close out, it created a poem in just seconds. I'm only going to give you the first line and the last. It's 5 verses long. But Code Weaver. In the realm of zeros and ones, where dreams take form, stands a luminary, a weaver of digital storms. Mark Andreessen, his name etched in binary fire, a titan who shaped our world, lifting it higher. And when the dot-com bubble burst, leaving ashes and dust, Andreessen stood firm, phoenix-like, in code we trust. So
That was hysterical. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.